People who were childhood friends with a now celebrity. Who were they and what were they like as a young person? Went to elementary school with Justin Bieber. He was a total bully and a giant asshat, but for some reason he took a liking to me and invited me to all his birthdays. A funny memory I have is of him making fun of some kid on the stairwell and then tripping and falling down the stairs and then crying all the way to the principal's office. He has always been a total douche. My husband grew up with Rami Malek. Probably comes at no surprise, but he and his twin are just as cool and down to earth as you'd expect. I went to school with Chris Pratt, and he was a nice guy, was able to bounce between all the different social circles, got along with everyone. I wasn't surprised when he became famous. I went to high school with John Heder, was a friendly guy, kinda goofy. When Napoleon Dynamite came out and became a craze, I couldn't believe it was him. Not me, but my dad used to be friends and play basketball with Shaquille O'Neal when they were around 13. They lived a couple houses away from each other at one point. My dad always resorted to clinging to his leg to keep him from scoring. He was a tank compared to my dad even back then. I knew Billy Joe Armstrong and the Green Day guys, and the Rancid guys, in their early times from my punk rock days. I did not know them well, but they were the nicest guys ever. I was standing in line with some friends at one of the sold-out shows, and Billy Joe darted out, ran up to us and said, "What are you guys doing standing in line when there's equipment to be brought in? Don't be silly." He then brought us back to their van and gave us each a cymbal, a bass drum pedal, etc. Something little we could each carry in and jump the line as roadies. Since we were old pals from early on, I ran into him backstage years later at a Weezer show. Again, I hadn't known them well, but knew them a bit before they were famous. Billy Joe came up to me, addresses me by name, and we had a nice chat. Success couldn't have come to a group of more deserving guys. I know the Charlie bit my finger guy. He's a bit annoying. My dad went to the next high school over from Steve Carell and they hung out in the same friend group. Said he was goofy and funny but not exceptionally so. They actually ran into one another at my great-uncle's funeral a few years back and chatted a bit. Said he seemed like he was still a pretty decent, normal guy. I went to secondary school with Isaac Hempstead Wright Brand from GOT. He's always been a nice guy and glad to see he's doing well. Hasn't changed at all from what I've seen. My dad went to college with Stephen Fry. Said he was one of the funniest dudes he ever met. Also my granddad went to art college with John Lennon. I unfortunately don't know if they knew each other well or not since my granddad passed away when I was 6. I learned that they went to college together through my mother. Taylor Lautner would get mad when people called him Shark Boy in high school. Can't say I blame him. Not me, but my aunt. She knew Snoop during high school, and at the time everyone there were getting into colors. She decided to join in, tied a bandana to her arm. Later in the day he took it from her, without a word. Turns out that people wearing her color were being hunted down. Overall, pretty cool dude. I hear he hasn't changed much. My dad grew up in Massapequa, town on Long Island, and was best friends in elementary through high school with Jerry Seinfeld. Jerry would often jokingly call my dad the second funniest kid in school, of course referring to himself as the funniest. Mike Myers went to a high school down the street from mine. We hung out with the same people. Charmingly funny and very humble. I haven't seen him for a very long time, but I do watch his interviews and he seems to be the same guy he was. I always loved it when he came on the TV wearing a Toronto Maple Leaf jersey. Happy he has done so well. He was a jokester and always good to people. Hasn't forgotten where he came from. That's endearing and rare. My great-grandma, still alive, lived close to Elvis' home. They talked like 3 times. She literally thought he was the most annoying little I lived in the same neighborhood as Eminem growing up. He was a few years older than me, but since we both kinda stand out, we ended up hanging out with the same people a few times before he got famous. Though he was already locally well known, we weren't friends though. He was pretty serious and kinda seemed like a recluse, but definitely not afraid to speak his mind if he felt it necessary. Never exchanged more than sup though. Went to high school with Neil Patrick Harris. He wasn't a bad dude, but wasn't humble in the least. He was still working on Doogie Howser. When he was at school, he wasn't allowed to be himself. Surrounded by fans and others, he had the nickname of Drama Dork by some of the other cliques. He hasn't gone to one of the reunions. Also went with Freddie Prinze Jr. He was a cool dude, but hung out with guys that stroked his ego and bullied others. I was an unfortunate victim to that. He hasn't made it to a reunion yet either. My uncle went to college with John Cena. He said he would walk down the dorm halls naked. They couldn't see him, so it was okay. I went to high school with Pink. I was kind of shy, but a lot of my friends were better friends with her. She was alright. I remember her singing to herself a lot. The kid who wrote the Eragon series, Christopher Paulini, went to school a ways from here. I can't say I knew him, but it's rural Montana, so I ran into him a few times since nobody lives out here. He used to show up at our school promoting his book dressed in Renaissance fair style clothing. We all thought he was kind of a geek. He's worth like 30 mil now because of a book he wrote when the rest of us were still trying to figure out who to take to prom. What's funny is that I actually recognize a few characters and places in his books as being partly based on locals and the surrounding area. My grandma was neighbors with Al Capone. She casually told me that he would come over for coffee some mornings. House was on 72nd and Prairie. My grandma went to high school with Ted Bundy. She said he was quiet and didn't really have any friends. Interesting that in the documentary he describes himself several times as being popular. I can't tell if it's delusion or part of his facade. Not me, but my mom went to junior high with Sheryl Sandberg, chief operating officer of Facebook. She says that both were sort of overachievers, and so there was always a rivalry between them. My mom considers her to have been a frenemy. Tobias Harris went to middle school and high school with him. I was not friends with him, but it was a small high school. Everyone knew he was going to be in the NBA. From what I saw, he was the hardest working kid. Very respectful, and his dad was very involved in everything basketball. Very nice family as well. Lindsay Lohan went ice skating with her when it was the cool thing to do. Would any believe me if I said she was actually normal and nice? Not a friend, but I knew Henry Cavill when he was a kid. He was sweet and reliable and generally a very nice person. Haven't seen him since around the era when he was taking roles in films like Hellraiser, because working as an actor isn't easy. Can't really imagine what it must be like to be the subject of the intense media gaze that goes with being a global celebrity. My dad interned with Tom Hanks when he first started out at the Great Lakes Shakespeare Festival. He was always very kind and charismatic with everyone, and just a constant ball of energy. When his son Colin was born, he proudly showed him off to everybody. He was probably just days old. About 3 years ago, there was a reunion of all the Great Lakes interns. My dad went, not knowing if he was going to show up, and if he did, if he'd remember him. But not only did he show up, he approached my dad and remembered him by his full name. He is honestly just a really great man. My mom went to college with Bob Odenkirk, Better Call Saul guy. They were in the radio department together, and apparently he was super funny. They also took shrooms together, and I've been jealous of my mom ever since I heard that story. My siblings and I found some pictures the other day of our mom with John Travolta and Peter Horton hanging out on the beach and with his private jet when they were younger. Our grandma was and still is best friends with Ellen Travolta, John's older sister. My mother went to elementary school with Jennifer Lopez and said that both her and her mother were complete snobs. Apparently Jennifer would call my dark Dominican mother a roach and not cool. My dad went to high school with George Lucas. George was the same age as my aunt, and had a huge crush on her. She was already dating my uncle at the time, and was super popular, so that never would have happened anyway. My dad was a few years younger. He was on the tennis team with George and would get rides to practice from him from time to time. My dad said George was nice and also pretty nerdy, no surprises there. And my dad was too, so they got along fine. I don't think he was bullied necessarily, but he definitely wasn't popular. He had big ears. They weren't friends, but they were friendly, at least as much as a senior would be to a scrawny freshman on the tennis team. He also talked about the car accident. It was a really huge deal in the town. I like to think George Lucas would remember my family, but who knows? Don't know if this counts, but I went to the same junior high and high school as Jensen Ackles, Dean Winchester in Supernatural. All the teachers would talk about how nice he was and how he was going to make it big. Think he was already a regular on a soap opera by then. I finally saw him when I was in tech theater. He had come to see his sister in a high school play. He stayed to the end and looked so proud of her. My father-in-law went to high school with and briefly, like one date briefly, dated Gillian Anderson. He says she was really wild. Your typical bad girl, but she was super sweet and genuinely a good person, so she got away with it.